So, talking about Satanism, Luciferianism, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, you see some popular examples of it. So, for example, the Baphomet statue that became famous, well, at least around 1100, if not long before. So that's with the goat head and the flame protruding out of the back, center of the skull, and the wings and the goat feet and the breasts, but yet a muscular man's body. So you've probably seen the image before. You could look it up. You got your laptops open, so if you just looked up, it's pronounced Baphomet, but typically we say Baphomet, whatever. So anyway, we know that in Detroit there was a 1 ton figure of Baphomet put there in what in America was apparently the best attended satanic mass for the unveiling of the Baphomet in Detroit a few years back. And as far as the Baal temple, was discovered in Iraq, and it had a huge gate entrance that weighed, I think, a couple tons, and that was manufactured as a replica. 2 of them. One of them went to D.C. It's there now and was unveiled. Another one, I think they put that in London. So Baal was the temple where they did child sacrifice, and that is on prominent display in D.C. permanently. And, when it comes to Molech, that's like the big owl. You've probably seen that. You could type that in. You'll find it right away, Wikipedia, wherever. So Molech, that's at the Bohemian Grove. Some of the stuff, I know that nobody knows it, and I feel bizarre talking about it, but I know that you can find this stuff readily enough. On this one, some of the stuff, maybe you're better off using DuckDuckGo, not Google, to where you'll find it quicker that way. Anyway, the Bohemian Grove, so that's where like the Clintons and the Bushes have gotten together, and they've hired prostitutes of various kinds and had their orgies, and they do this every year in California, along with like Gergen of U.S. News and World Report, and prominent people in the press. So this is a really big shot, high-end deal that happens every year. And it was heavily, heavily guarded. Anyway, somebody you'd call fake news that turned out to be real news, but still nobody hears about it because the mainstream media won't pick it up, of course. Got a camera person in there who worked in the kitchen to videotape this stuff, so that's initially how the story broke. Maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. And where you'll have all these figures in white robes, in their procession up to this massive statue of Molech with, big torches in front of it and in front of a lake or some kind of body of water. And in effigy, they burn a human as a sacrifice to the god Molech. Similarly, that the past presidents, people on the Supreme Court, very influential, powerful people, over the last 150 years, have gone through Yale, right, where they have Skull and Bones, where that sanctuary is designed to begin with to be in the center of the city. Anybody heard of Skull and Bones? Look it up. So that's where, people like our former President Bush and Bush Sr. and Jr., where they lay naked in the coffin by the head of Geronimo, where supposedly they stole the skull of Geronimo and brought it there, and tell about all their sexual exploits. So, you can't make this stuff up, but look into it. Of course you don't know it. Things like this, you'd think, okay, the occult is growing, right? So you hear about it vaguely through like the New Age movement, but not much specificity to it unless you look on sources that you don't normally run into by just flipping your television dial. So all this is sort of a background for our look at Satanism. So you notice that we just watched that video of a Satanist telling you what Satanism is, right? At least his brand of it. So I recommend that you do that sort of thing. If you want to know about Hegel, read Hegel, right? If you want to know about Kant, read Kant, all right? If you want to understand about egoism, read those who support egoism. You know what I'm saying? You got to be very careful not to go to sources where what you're reading are the enemies of it, right? Well, by and large, that's why I say now, use scholarly sources. No, they don't have to be peer-reviewed, because academia can become this big echo chamber where they too have their culture, and so they too have their enemies, and so they too will not present their enemies probably in always such a objective, fair-minded light. You know what I mean? So the same thing is going to be true of, if you look at Satanism, it's gaining popularity, as is Wicca, witchcraft, right? Very much gaining popularity. But, if you go to your Reformed pastor to learn about that, that can be fine. And let's say you're Reformed and you respect your pastor. Okay, good. But, would you want to go to the Satanist to learn about your Reformed theology? Right? Probably not a great starting point. Same thing the other way around then. You know what I mean? So, and the same thing true then with so much of academia. Its roots are in, modernity, which was heavily influenced by, let's just say views not so friendly to what we call medieval views or the Dark Ages. How is it that it was called the Dark Ages? Is that what they called themselves? Yes, we're really dark and ignorant and dumb and lazy. Yes, we're the Dark Ages, right? No, that was the title superimposed on them, right? Well, quite arguably, in the Dark Ages, where they had to go through things like the Black Death and the fall of Rome, the collapse of civilization, you had the preservation of sciences, right? And they were making progress best they could. Well, anyway, the same thing for anything that you study. If you study it from people who hate them or fundamentally disagree with them roundly, you're probably not going to get a very good representation of what they actually believe, what they say their own practices actually are. You know what I'm saying? So, with Satanism then, we have personal and impersonal variety. So when it comes to the personal variety, they would believe that Satan actually is a spirit that one can come in contact with, who can grant you, whatever it is you want. Power, fame, wealth, sex, whatever. So a famous example in American folklore has to do with Robert Johnson, the blues player who goes to the crossroads. So Eric Clapton wrote a song about that. Robert Johnson wrote a song about himself. He's got Hellhound on his tail, I think it was called, something like that. Where lots of examples of that, where people say that they sell their soul to the devil, literally, in writing, with their blood, in order to gain these powers. And then there's the impersonal variety. So with the impersonal variety, the idea is, you've seen Star Wars, the Force, right? The Force be with you. So there's the Force that, whether you're on the good side or the bad side, black magic, white magic, either way, you're actually making use of the same force. It's one and the same force, right? So good and bad, they're just different aspects of that same one thing. So so by gaining access to that, it's gaining access to power that you could use as you will. But and historically, this is very influential. I mean, it was called Vril by Madame Blavatsky and by the Nazis, who Hitler and Himmler and others were heavily into the occult, and they wanted to tap into this Vril so that they would have this power to be able to even do things like power, a flying saucer, rockets, whatever. So they take it very seriously in their quest for world domination. So that's an impersonal power, and this line of more contemporary, basically you could call it satanic, Luciferian, Illuminati, whatever. I'm using these terms loosely here, but would be with Madame Blavatsky. So you could look her up, and she's kind of especially a spearhead of it. You can think of her as like the beginning of the New Age movement, so-called. Even though the roots of this stuff, goes back to Egypt, the Knights Templar, Hinduism. But anyway, from her then, from Madame Blavatsky, came Crowley, Aleister Crowley. So maybe you know the song of Led Zeppelin, Mr. Crowley, that song. Maybe not. Well, anyway, Aleister Crowley was super influential in the 60s. He died, I think, in the late 40s, I think. But anyway, he was very influential on the rock musicians of the 60s and the 70s. So groups like the Beatles, they have him on their Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a picture of him on there. And the Doors, very influenced by him. And the Rolling Stones, all of them. Very influenced by Aleister Crowley. He claimed that he was the wickedest man on earth, and he had the notion that we are under these strictures of our moral norms that hold us back, that confine us, give us this false sense of guilt, keep us from pleasure, and keep us from being all that we can be. So it's got similar overtones to Nietzsche and to Freud. So that if you actually do something that society would think of as being especially atrocious and awful, evil, that would be a way for you to break on through to the other side, as the Doors had it, right? That because you'll break through from convention and not be bound by that. So, moving on to Marina Abramovich and her spirit cooking, again in this line of Crowley. So if you look that up, Marina Abramovich and spirit cooking. And again, I'm dealing with something this controversial. You probably want to use DuckDuckGo, probably not Google. Try both of them and see what you get. I imagine your results are going to be very different. So this actually shows the extreme influence of this strand in thinking, even at the highest echelons of American politics presently. So that's all. I'll go there. I don't want to get into that much. But at the popular level, currently, you'll hear, like Beyonce, you can just look her up, find her talking about this openly, that before she gives her performances, she raises her hands and asks Sasha to possess her, this goddess that possesses her. And she says that without that, she would never be able to sing and dance the way that she does. Yeah, the same sort of thing. Anybody ever heard of Oprah Winfrey? Probably not. Well, anyway, same sort of thing in that, she said like and this is just readily available. on her interviews about being possessed by in her case, it's a ghost, being possessed by a ghost to be able to act as she did in the movie The Color Purple. So this kind of supernaturalism in this line of Satanism, Luciferianism, Illuminatiism, whatever you want to call it, is very prevalent in American politics, in American pop culture, in our history. So I realize, though, that it itself has a philosophies that can be addressed as philosophy. And so I thought, well, why not address it the same way as you try to address anything, where you try to address it, fairly, head on. Let you guys do your own research, do your own thinking, give you freedom to talk about it in your groups for your presentation if you wanted to choose something like this. And I just kind of opened the door for you. Anyway, philosophies that you can see are compatible with this notion of Satanism is egoism. So we've already looked into that. So you need to do what's right for you, period. So it's the opposite of altruism. What you need to do is even be ready to sacrifice yourself to some extent or another for the well-being of another. But instead, no, just you do what's right for you. So, yeah, do you call that selfish? Well, I guess so. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, that's for you to work out. Some people put the word narcissism on it, in that it's self-focused. Well, again, it smacks also of Nietzscheism. Now, he would say that these sorts of words that we can use about something like this are words with negative connotations, but, we should look at it in a different light. So, for Nietzsche to talk about domination or greed or selfishness or things like this, terms that you'd have, like the term barbarian. He said, we think of that as bad. You shouldn't be a barbarian, dominating those who are different than you, who are weaker than you, just for your personal advantage. Well, you see, we have this negative connotation on it because of the main problem for Nietzsche, who he thought is in the way of humanity moving on to the next level, to the Uberman, sort of this transhumanist thing, is Christianity. Because Christianity talks about, sacrificing, loving your neighbor as yourself, turn the other cheek, do good to those who persecute you, all this kind of stuff. So all that has to do with, he'd call that this sheep kind of mentality for the weak, as opposed to the wolf kind of mentality of the barbarian, who we need to learn to use these terms actually as positive things. So, for an example, the wolf that takes down the gazelle who is dragging in the back of the pack, he's just doing what the wolf does, right? And it's not bad. Matter of fact, you could even see it as a benefit to the pack, because then the older ones or the weak ones are getting trimmed off. So it's good in that it can help good genes progress and bad genes hinder. Well, that's the kind of take that the Nazis would want to use Nietzsche for. Now you might think, well, that's the Nazis using Nietzsche unfairly. Maybe yes, maybe no. But anyway, he was one of their favorite philosophers. So it has to do then, this line of, we'll just loosely call it Satanism, has to do with egoism and overcoming norms, looking out for yourself, and hedonism. So Aleister Crowley's mantra, he said it was the whole of the law, was do what thou wilt. Kind of sounds like Nike's just do it, right? You'd have to be smart about it. if you want to be a smart egoist and a smart utilitarian, well, you don't want to do things that are going to quickly get you into trouble and actually work out badly for you, like get you sent to jail, right? But other than that, you want to do what you have to do if you want to do it. If you can get away with it, great. So we're, in Nietzsche's words, beyond good and evil. There's no good and evil. Those are just constructs that we have. But if you go beyond that, well, then you just do what you want to do, period. That's the whole of the law. You want to do it, just do it. And again, so long as you're not foolish about it and get caught in a way that is going to work out badly for you, right? But it's all about you. It's all about your pleasures. So that's where, like the Satanists that you showed there would like to host an orgy, and where all sexual constraint is off the table. Period, right? So, I mean, Aleister Crowley even, recommended that if you molest and murder a young boy, preferably an especially smart one, that you would gain more power through doing that. Because there's not really any good or evil. You want to do it, just do it. And just think about yourself, don't think about another. So anyway, if you kind of combine egoism and hedonism and read some Nietzsche, mix it all up, and, well, you might end up with something like Marina Abramovich's spirit cooking. So you can look up spirit cooking. You take some sperm, and you take some menstrual juice, and you take some milk from the breast, and I forget the whole concoction. But anyway, you mix it up, and you can see her using that concoction to paint with on walls, to splash it on, little baby dolls. And she says that when she's doing this kind of thing publicly in her art show, it's an art show. And so you can watch her do that on YouTube. You'll find it. But if she does that at a party, a spirit cooking party, where she actually, her emails were leaked and she was inviting prominent American politicians to these, where you have things like a body that looks just like a corpse, and very real-like, and they cut it up and eat it as a way to, simulate, what am I trying to say here? Cannibalism. And then you do the spirit cooking there, and you do the rituals that she does in her art show. Well, then she says, actually, you're doing actual magic that has power, that's effective. So, that's enough about Satanism and philosophy. But I feel like it's important to kind of hit it straight up because, more and more the occult is growing in popularity, obviously with our Baphomet statue in Detroit, right? And in many cities in America, to where it's a kind of topic you need to be ready to talk about sensibly and fair-mindedly and philosophically, because it is very philosophical, and it is and often has been very influential in American pop culture and politics, and certainly had a lot to do with the Nazis. Of course, it's not the kind of thing you normally would look up or find, but they would take like an SS agent and bring him to the basically their temple, where he's going to have his new 12 apostles, and cut his head off, and then use that head as a way to channel these spirits. They were trying to get in touch with the, well, you look it up for yourself. So, yeah, this sort of thing has always been underground, not much talked about, but yet quite influential throughout history. So, enough of that.